Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
BBC News understands that the Democratic Unionist Party's 10 Westminster MPs are planning to vote down the budget later this month if the government agrees a Brexit deal that they're not happy with. It's a move which, in theory, could bring down the government. The DUP says it will reject any deal with Brussels that includes proposals to treat Northern Ireland differently from the rest of the UK. Our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, reports.
If the colours don't give you a headache, the deal just might. Welcome to the room where next week Theresa May hopes a deal with the EU might be in reach. But could the compromise she's heading for mean she loses her place? Northern Irish MPs are furious that Brexit bartering is likely to include some extra checks on trades done between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. Intolerable to the DUP, whose votes the Prime Minister relies on.
We have been telling people about our red line. So what is important for us is to say to her very clearly that any impediment on the two-way access in the UK single market would not be good for the Union and would not be good for the economy of Northern Ireland.
And that's not just bluster. Theresa May badly needs the DUP, the Northern Irish Party with 10 MPs, to win votes in the House of Commons. And they're adamant they just won't accept a Brexit compromise that separates Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK in any way. If Theresa May tries it, they might pull support from the government altogether. A tiny party, yes, but one with a very big voice. The EU's negotiator was clear today. Even though there wouldn't be an old-fashioned Irish border, some checks carried out might have to increase tenfold.
They would have to cover 100% rather than 10% of live animals and animals-derived products. I understand why such procedures are politically sensitive. Brexit was not our choice.
You feeling optimistic about the deal, Prime Minister?
With only days to go, the Prime Minister has little choice but to stick to her course, whatever the noise. Knowing in Brussels, Belfast and at her back, there are plenty who'd pull her plan down.
When we come back with a deal, I would hope that everybody across this whole House will put the national interest first. The British people having voted to leave, it is our duty to ensure that we leave.
Tomorrow, the most senior cabinet ministers are being called into Number 10. The decisions being taken right now will dictate not just what happens at this address, but at all of ours. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Now, Theresa May has summoned senior cabinet ministers to a meeting tomorrow for a briefing on the state of the Brexit negotiations. The talks in Brussels are at a crucial stage in the run-up to the European Council summit next week. Today, the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, told MEPs that the withdrawal agreement was about 85% complete. But the Northern Ireland border remains a sticking point. This afternoon, the Democratic Unionist Party threatened to vote against Theresa May's budget later this month if she doesn't stick to their red lines. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster. Gary, why has and what has Theresa May called her cabinet ministers together to talk about?
That, funnily enough, is what some of them were wondering. I spoke to a couple of the people who got the summons, got the email diary date pinging into their diaries, and they got their private secretaries to try and ring around on the grapevine, find out in Whitehall, does anybody know what this is about? Who else is coming? And what they've worked out, I think, is that this is to update them on progress on the negotiations in Brussels, which seem to have come to something of a head. It looks as though there has been, let's not overstate this, but some kind of breakthrough, and it looks as though there is something at least for these ministers to examine on the exit terms that Britain has on Brexit. And I mean, you can gather from the secrecy, the fact that these ministers themselves aren't seeing papers beforehand, aren't entirely sure what's on the agenda, that this is being kept to a very close circle of people indeed. But we know that the outstanding issues, the real neuralgic ones that they're looking at are will Britain, as part of the backstop, the sort of safety net arrangements, be allowed to stay in the customs union. It might be called something else, more or less in perpetuity, though they'll probably disguise that as well. There'll be ways to opt out of that. And the other big question, what will happen to the regulation of goods in Northern Ireland? Will they operate under some other system, the EU system rather than the UK system? That is what has been massively neuralgic for the DUP, the Democratic Unionists, who prop up the government, of course. They've been sabre-rattling like crazy today, trying to make sure that they head off any attempt to make them regulated in a way that is different from the rest of the United Kingdom. We'll find out soon whether that it has been achieved. One final point, though, there was a speech by Michel Barnier that you mentioned today, and I thought one of the most interesting things that was in that, is ranged across the whole Brexit issue, was when he turned around and said, not many people have noticed this, that there will be 10 negotiating strands, 10 of them starting after Brexit. A reminder that the real work about what kind of future relationship we actually have with the EU has effectively been pushed down the pipe.
Gary Gibbon in Westminster.
All along, the Brexit talks seem to have involved one step forward, followed by another sharp step back again. It looked today, as Robert Peston reported last night, as if the two sides were closing in on a deal over the vexed issue of the Irish border. The EU's lead negotiator, Michel Barnier, even talked about a deal being agreed by next week. Oh, praise the Lord, you may be thinking it is almost over and we can start talking about something else. But not so fast. The devil, as ever, is deep in the detail. And if the Prime Minister thought the Democratic Unionists, on whose support she depends, were on board, she might have to think again. Tonight, they refused to back the government in a vote in the Commons. And then, of course, there are Mrs May's hardline Brexit faction. You won't be incredibly surprised to hear that they hate the deal that seems to be in the offing.
You feeling optimistic about the deal, Prime Minister?
Whatever headway she may be making in Brussels, the outlook for the Prime Minister in Westminster was looking anything but rosy tonight.
The ayes to the right, 227. The noes to the left, 286. So the noes have it, the noes have it.
In what a senior DUP source told us was a warning, the party which normally props up the Tories abstained on a key vote on farming policy for when Britain leaves the EU. Earlier, Arlene Foster didn't deny rumours they might even vote down the budget.
So what is important for us is to say to her very clearly that any impediment on the two-way access in the UK single market would not be good for the Union and would not be good for the economy of Northern Ireland.
So you would vote against the budget?
Would you vote down the budget? Would you bring down...
The EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, suggested today a deal was within reach, outlining what he sees as a potential compromise over the Irish backstop. There'd be an increase in checks on some food products and livestock transported mainly by sea from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. But there would be no checks at the border on other goods imported into the province. That, the government could argue, would mean no new border down the Irish Sea, while also avoiding a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic.
The EU proposes to carry out these checks in the least intrusive way possible. The only visible systematic checks between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK would involve scanning the barcodes on the lorries or containers, which could be done on ferries or in transit ports.
But the former Brexit secretary warns tonight on ITV's Peston programme it's all a devious plan to keep Britain in a customs union indefinitely. He claims he was kept in the dark by the Prime Minister.
If I can be stitched up by number 10, Britain can be stitched up by the European Commission in exactly the same way if we don't get absolutely explicit guarantees on timetable.
Earlier, Theresa May appealed directly to MPs to back her when she presents the final deal to Parliament.
We're working for that deal. When we come back with a deal, I would hope that everybody across this whole House will put the national interest first. The British people having voted to leave, it is our duty to ensure that we leave.
Not an easy day for the Prime Minister, but it's only likely to get harder in the weeks ahead. Libby Vina, News at 10, Westminster.
Well, to be totally honest with you, this story's been moving pretty fast today, and so we're doubly grateful to have Robert here after recording his programme to explain it to us. I listened to Michel Barnier's speech tonight, and I have to say, as I listened to it, I thought, oh, I don't know if the DUP are ever going to be able to accept this. What do you reckon?
So, maybe I've made a misjudgment, because on the evening news tonight I said I thought the DUP would come round, because actually the big practical change that's going to happen is that there will be 100% vetting on food and agricultural products going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Now, that may seem terribly onerous, that may seem in a way like creating a new border, but actually at the moment 10% of food is checked. And I sort of assumed that, given that checks are already there, the DUP could live with more checks of the same.
You may be right,
but, you know, the DUP are unhappy, and it's certainly true that there will be a theoretical change under the backstop, which is that they would remain effectively in the single market and the UK wouldn't. Maybe that's too much for them. I mean, tonight they have fired a very serious warning shot across the bows of the government by refusing to vote with the government on this agricultural bill. So they're not happy. We won't know till next week whether they're going to be placated. It's very tense for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, and we all know second-guessing the DUP is one of the hardest games in politics. Nevertheless, if she goes forward with something like this, she could maybe not rely on Labour votes, but a Labour abstention to get it through the House. What do you think of the...
Well, I mean, just to be clear again, David Davis on my show tonight said profoundly unhappy with staying in the customs union, which is part of this backstop deal. There will be tens of Tory MPs who won't vote for the deal that she's negotiating. I asked David Lidington, who's effectively her deputy, what she would do. Would she put the country first or the Tory party first? And he basically said, well, he didn't say, he said she'd put the country first, which said to me that she is prepared to split her party to get the right kind of Brexit. Now, when I put that to David Lidington, he looked deeply embarrassed, but I think she will face that choice. It's a very painful choice for any Prime Minister. Country or party?
OK.
We've entered the tunnel, apparently. That's what European civil servants are calling the run-up to next week's crucial summit, where they hope the withdrawal agreement taking the UK out of the EU will be completed. And they're determined not to talk about the details, lest that cause a backlash, notably in this country. In particular, their worries are focused on the Democratic Unionist Party. Yesterday, EU negotiator Michel Barnier spent much of the day in talks with the DUP leader, Arlene Foster. But today it became clear that far from falling into place, the DUP is holding fast to its Brexit blood-red lines and is ready to vote against the budget, even if that risks bringing down the government. Our political editor, Nick Watt, broke that story.
They may be a tiny band, but they can pack a punch. Nearly a year ago, Theresa May was forced to return to Brussels to rewrite her Brexit plans when the DUP said no. And now they are threatening to vote against the budget if the Prime Minister breaches their red lines on Brexit. Losing a budget would paralyse the government. In Brussels, the DUP leader avoided questions about their plans.
Would you bring down the British government? Why won't you repeat the threat that your colleagues at Westminster are making?
What are the concerns you have about the breakthrough on the backstop?
So is it an empty threat to vote against the budget?
Would you vote against the budget?
I understand that after meetings in Brussels, the DUP fears that a Brexit deal is emerging in which Northern Ireland would be treated differently to the rest of the UK. That would be a breach of their blood-red line, the trigger for abandoning Theresa May. One former Tory cabinet minister told me the warnings from the DUP should strike the fear of God into Downing Street. One Whitehall watcher believes Theresa May would be in severe trouble.
Voting down the budget is about as hostile an act as you can make when you've got a confidence and supply agreement which says two things. You'll support the government on Brexit and you'll support them on finance measures. So I think that's it's pretty hard to get more hostile than that, and basically that's declaring the confidence and supply agreement that's been in place since the election 2017 a dead duck.
The government predicted that the DUP would support the budget because Number 10 will not countenance the breakup of the UK. But the DUP believes a two-part Brexit deal could involve a temporary arrangement in which the UK as a whole will be in some form of a customs union with the EU, not a breach of their red lines, But they fear some form of regulatory checks on goods travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. That would breach their blood red line, an additional barrier within the UK. One observer sees the outline of an initial deal to allow the UK to leave the EU, though there would be pitfalls.
The Prime Minister is potentially very vulnerable between the October summit and the likely November summit. Because in the October summit, she may well agree more or less to the withdrawal agreement, including the money payments to the EU and the Irish backstop, which implies there may need to be checks across the Irish Sea on goods that go across the sea. But she won't have got the attached political declaration, which she hopes will show that there's no need for that backstop ever to be needed and used and implemented. In November, if she's lucky, she'll get a political declaration that makes the whole Irish backstop look more palatable. But for a month between the two summits, she's signed away the money, agreed to an Irish backstop, and has got nothing on a trade agreement in return. So she's very vulnerable for the period of the autumn.
Once it was all sweetness and light between the Tories and the DUP. Now, as the Brexit endgame nears, this marriage of convenience is under strain.
Which way will she go? Well, Nick Watt is here to explore that a little further. They talk about the tunnel, but any signs of movement in Brussels today emerging from the tunnel?
Well, I was talking to one senior member of the Cabinet who was saying that they do sense that there is improved mood music in Brussels, though this person said to me, we are not there yet. But it was interesting, you heard Charles Grant there in my package talking about how Theresa May get serious movement on the withdrawal treaty. That's how you leave the EU next week, but she might have to wait until later in the year for the political declaration on the future relationship. This member of the Cabinet said those two things have got to happen at the same time. We've got to jump together on those two things. And in public, the UK and the EU are far apart. Michel Barnier did quite a lengthy speech today in French and in English. And he made the point that as long as the UK wants to remain fully outside the customs union, fully outside the single market, you'd have to have those checks down the Irish Sea to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland.
And if the DUP did vote against the budget, Downing Street saying, oh no, that under the fixed term parliament, that wouldn't necessarily be the end of the government, or they say it wouldn't be the end of the government. But I mean, does she have a kind of nuclear option? Can she rely on others to get the deal through?
In her heart, Theresa May would like to get this deal through with Conservative votes and DUP votes, but she could do it without DUP votes and without Brexiteer Tories if the Labour Party decides that it will enable the Brexit deal. I understand that there is a very high-level discussion at the most senior levels in the shadow cabinet about what they should do if there is a deal. And there's one group who are saying the Labour Party cannot enable a Tory Brexit. There's another group that are saying we cannot be seen to be blocking Brexit. And what they're thinking, this group, is that if there is a deal, Theresa May will be standing up with the leaders of Europe saying, we have a deal. And if Labour says it's going to vote against that, you would then say, so what are you going to do? Well, they can't renegotiate it because the deal is done, so they would only have the option of forcing no deal, and if you force no deal, obviously Labour could be blamed then for the economic consequences of no deal. All that's based on there being a deal.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I mean, we're fascinating, but still, obviously, we're a step or two away from that moment. Christopher Montgomery, the former Chief of Staff to the DUP in Westminster, is here now. Welcome back to the studio. He was also on the board for Vote Leave and is now a member of the Conservative Party. And in a moment, we'll be talking to Labour MP Alison McGovern about their position. But let's start with you, Christopher. This idea that the DUP, if these red lines are not respected, particularly on those checks from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster would be ready to say, yes, we bring the government down. Is that really what the DUP is ready to do now?
They'd have no choice, and let's give them some credit. They were the first people to say this last December. They said that this iteration of the backstop, which Robbins has always been working towards, wouldn't fly. And this has been one of the many mistakes that May has made in the way that she's conducted Brexit policy. Who is Robbins negotiating with? Barnier. Barnier is a top-flight politician. Robbins isn't. He's a very good civil servant, but he's not a politician. And he doesn't get the political nuance here. So just take the point that Nick made about the budget. Technically, the budget, since Fixed Term Parliament Act, isn't a confidence matter anymore.
That's Downing Street's line today.
But if you don't have a budget, is she going to be Prime Minister for free? Is she just going to do it because of her public service ethos? I mean, our parliamentary system rests on supply. If the government can't get money through, government can't happen.
But you know, OK, well, let's say by your logic, parliamentary logic, it can't go on. She is brought down, and there's an election that brings Jeremy Corbyn to power.
I think she's in very severe danger of being brought down for two reasons. Both the backstop, which she should never have agreed to in the first place, and the fact that it's aimed at getting Brino. So the reason for the backstop is to try and get Brino, and neither Tory Brexiteers nor the DUP want either part of that.
Sorry, spell out Brino for those who...
Brexit in name only.
Yeah.
So this is the reason why the government has pretended there's an insoluble problem on the border, which plainly there isn't. So they've gone...
Well, OK.
So
we'll go back to the border in just a moment, but I just want to hear your view on, would the DUP really want a situation where there was a Corbyn government? Would they expect their views about the future of Northern Ireland to receive a better hearing from a Corbyn government than it would from Theresa May?
Two things on that. I don't think the parliamentary mechanics would lead to a general election. I think it would simply lead to a new Tory leader and a new Prime Minister who would learn the lesson of not doing Brexit. In terms of a general election, if the DUP found themselves pitched into an election that they had caused standing up for Northern Ireland staying in the UK, they would get the biggest vote they'd ever got, and they'd also have the prospect of another hung parliament.
With their base. But it's fascinating that you say you don't buy Downing Street's line that under Fixed Term Parliament Act, not having a budget would lead to the fall of the government. But at the same time, you are also saying, well, you don't actually want the fall of the government, you want the fall of the Conservative Party leader, and that is essentially your budget position is a tactic to bring about a new Conservative Prime Minister.
The great mistake that May made was checkers. She should have stuck to boiling the frog. Given that she wants as little Brexit as possible, that was the intelligent tactic to keep following. But what she did with checkers was that she bit off more than she can chew. That's why she lost Boris, it's why she lost DD. And if she goes for a Brino, which keeps us in the customs union, effectively aligns us to the single market, possibly has intra-UK trade border, where's she going to get the votes from to do this in Parliament? It's not in Corbyn's interest to do it. There simply aren't enough pro-European Labour MPs to outweigh pro-Brexit Tory MPs. The numbers simply don't stack up to get this.
Is there any flex in the DUP position on regulatory checks on goods going from Britain to Northern Ireland? This seems to be the last key crux of this, because of course there are already some.
There are already some, but why would there be any more? The only reason there would be any more would be because you've got an external agency to the UK saying, well, actually, you've got to have...
If it's UK civil servants doing it.
But why would they be doing it? They'd be doing it at the behest of the EU. We would no longer be in.
Well, that would be the shape of a compromise, I suppose. Christopher Montgomery, thank you very much. Let's now talk to Alison McGovern, Labour MP from Wirral South, and very involved with this issue too. I mean, can you first just give us a sense, because there are these stories around, and you probably heard what Nick Watt had to say, of how many Labour MPs do you think might be willing, in that situation, weeks or even months from now, when time is very short, to support a Theresa May negotiated Brexit as an alternative to disorder?
The answer is, I don't know, but I suspect it's very few. And the reason why I suspect that is because the Labour Party has been through a long process of engaging with our trade union colleagues. Labour parties up and down the country have been talking about Brexit for the past year, and we just had a conference where the whole of the Labour movement came together and essentially gave support to the TUC's position, which is that, you know, we all would like a general election, but if that doesn't happen, we think a second vote needs to stay on the table. That is, of course, supposing that the Keir Starmer tests aren't met by the deal that the Prime Minister puts in front of us. So the Labour Party has gone through this very long process of everybody talking to each other and discussing it to get to a common position. So I should think most Labour MPs will support that, won't they?
Most, I'm sure, but it doesn't take many, does it, to substitute for the 10 DUP? I mean, to put it at its most literal, and some other Tory rebels. I mean, could there be numbers in the dozens, do you think?
Well, as I said, we don't know, do we? Because, you know, at the moment people are talking. But as far as the Labour Party goes, we will be doing what we do, which is talking to each other, working it out, making sure that, you know, our position is supported and listening to what people have got to say. That's how we do things. It's how we've come to our position that we agreed with at conference, and that's the way we'll continue. And if you look at the tests that Keir Starmer set out, frankly, if Theresa May wanted Labour support for a deal, all she had to do was ring Keir Starmer and say, listen, tell me a little bit more about these tests. How do we meet them? But they've never done that. They're not interested.
Well,
the Tories are interested in a fight amongst themselves, not interested in bringing together, you know, in a cross-party way, politicians from across the House to try and get this through the House of Commons.
Key to those tests is this concept that the UK should enjoy exactly the same benefits of single market and customs union that membership conferred. Now, anyone in the Commission will tell you it's not going to happen, and particularly if this political crisis only happens late in November and time is so short before the expiry of the Article 50 period. Can you really fight an election on a platform that we're going to renegotiate this whole thing?
Mark, you're right, and that's why we should listen when Francis O'Grady says that probably Article 50 needs to be extended. And the Labour Party's approach has always been to say, you know, this is what we're looking for. I hear all this stuff about Brino this and DD that, and I just think, what's that got to do with my constituents' jobs? You know, our process is about making sure that the way we interact with this Brexit mess that the Tories have created is to try and say, if we do Brexit, here's a way to do it that isn't terrible for our economy. But if we can't, and we can't find a way through the House of Commons, then we need to think about either a general election or putting the deal to the public and helping us all move on that way.
But if none of that is possible in the timescale we're talking about, and you are concerned about jobs, you don't want to take responsibility for a no-deal Brexit, could you see circumstances in which the party would then fall in behind a May plan?
So the way that the Labour Party will vote for a deal is if it meets Keir Starmer's tests. That's been true since he set them out. And the fact is, all of this stuff about optics and what it would look like is interesting, but it doesn't connect with the real world of, you know, the businesses that my constituents work for in, say, car manufacturing or other things, where this is a real life question now. We've already got people, you know, shedding jobs here, having fewer shifts there. And that's why this is not about what it looks like politically. This is about the reality and what it means.
Alison McGovern, thank you very much for joining us. Well, we'll see how that unfolds in the coming weeks.